I share your commitment to enacting trade policy that actually helps workers and helps our economy. And as I talk to my fellow colleagues from around the country about this trade commission, they're very impressed, and hopefully other states will do the same. Mainers know all too often, too well, what's happened in the state of Maine with trade. You don't have to go too far in the 2nd Congressional District. You'll find abandoned mills, vacant factories, and the painful reminder of what was and no longer is in those regions. Their jobs have been outsourced to countries that pay slave wages. Years ago, we were told that NAFTA would raise the standard of living of all countries involved. Looking at the empty industrial buildings in the 2nd District, they've left a lot of people in Maine behind and throughout the country. But not only the United States, NAFTA has left behind workers in Mexico. Farmers are struggling to survive. Too many are surviving on substandard wages, and we are hearing a lot of problems with immigration. If you recall, during that whole NAFTA debate, then the Attorney General, the United States Attorney General, Janet Reno, said Congress must pass NAFTA, and by doing so, it will solve 2/3 of our illegal immigration problems. And if it doesn't, it's a failed policy. Well, it's a failed policy because actually what's happened is 1.4 million agricultural workers in Mexico have lost their jobs. And the illegal immigration problem has actually gotten worse here in the United States. And I was up in Ottawa just a couple of weeks ago, and I listened to Parliament, and they were talking about the same thing, about job losses in manufacturing. And actually the trade minister, when I met with him, suggested we might want to renegotiate the NAFTA trade deal. And it's not only NAFTA. If you look at the trade deal since NAFTA, whether it's CAFTA, Oman, or Peru, those trade deals are built upon that same trade model. In a lot of cases, word for word, except they just change the countries around. So I firmly believe that in order to address trade imbalance, we have to change the trade model and how it's working. And I'm currently working on legislation in a bipartisan manner, working with the various groups, the labor environmental groups, as well as business groups, to change that trade model. And I'll be introducing that legislation shortly once we have a sign-off on all this groups that involved. And the reason why I fought against the Peru trade deal, although it passed, is you've heard a lot about the true Peru trade deal would improve the tax of labor and environmental standards. But what you failed to hear was actually, if you got into that trade deal dealing with intellectual property rights, it's pretty much word for word. Also, I think what you failed to hear is that the President of the United States Chamber of Commerce, Tom Donahue, and I got his quote here, stated, and I quote, that he is encouraged by assurance that the labor provisions cannot be read to require compliance with the ILO Convention, end of quote. Even though the U.S. Chamber of Commerce supported Peru, there are other business organizations such as the United States Business and Industry Council who opposed it. And I think any new trade policy must also address the whole issue when you look at global trade. For instance, the China currency manipulation issue, subsidies, the intellectual property rights, and you have to look at taxes as well between different countries, such as the value-added tax, which is a huge disadvantage for the United States, and businesses are suffering dramatically. Colombia was talked about. I want to talk just a little bit about Colombia, because one of the things I haven't heard more specifically is that Colombia continues to lead the world in the number of murders of trade unionists. In 2007 alone, 38 labor activists were murdered. Of the 2,262 labor activists that was murdered between 1991 and 2006, almost 400 were killed during the Uribe administration. 97% of these cases had been unresolved. Several members of Congress in Colombia, as well as high-ranking officials closely allied with President Uribe, have been arrested or under investigation for their links to the paramilitary. I met personally with other members of Congress with President Uribe, and asked them why these people haven't been brought to justice. Why are these murders still going on? What has the government done with Operation Dragon? What did he know about it, and why wasn't the former colonel brought to justice? And this was about 4 or 5 months ago. I still have not heard anything from President Uribe to the questions I posed to him. I also met with a lot of folks from Columbia, elected officials, union officials on several different occasions who met with me in my office, and I heard gruesome stories about the murders and the fact that where they make other workers in neighborhoods stand out there where they actually behead unionists. It's just outrageous. And when I met with the second group a month later, and I asked them about the beheadings, whether that actually goes on, and they said yes. And I think it's important if we're going to sign a trade deal, with countries, that we look at the human rights violation. And by signing a trade deal with Colombia, saying that they're cleaning up their act, or they will clean up the act, is not the way to go, because there's no incentive for them to do that.